you would propose such a thing as purportedly competing currencies is you don't have a solution. And we know that already then from just thinking. Paul even so much as admits this in a quote which is soon provided. The prospect of American citizens turning away from the dollar toward alternate currencies will provide the necessary impetus to the U.S. government to regain control of the dollar and halt its downward spiral, he said. Well, how preposterous is this? In other words, if we turned away to alternate currencies, we would fix the dollar so we could return to it? Or if it's fixed, we would divorce ourselves from it forever? I mean, what kind of thinking is this? I mean, is it even any thinking at all, you know? The problem is, Ron Paul even boasts that he's an Austrian economist. These people advocate banking because, quote, it can be an extremely profitable business, unquote. Go read Frederick Hayek's dissertation on, purportedly on a free market monetary system at von Mises. You know, they're advocates of banking. They're advocates of interest. Ron Paul himself is an advocate of elevated rates of interest, purportedly because elevated rates of interest would have discouraged us from borrowing excessively to, of course, the further unearned profit of a purported banking system which no more than publishes evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. Wrong, wrong, wrong on all counts. So long as we can persist in servicing debts under higher rates of interest, we have to borrow more interest back into circulation as a new debt above the former sum of debt. So long as we can survive in under such as elevated rates of interest, we can only accumulate more artificial indebtedness at an even escalated rate, which of course precipitates in terminal failure all the sooner. This man is an advocate of what destroys us, what is inimical to our purposes, claiming that by increasing interest rates you would be discouraging people from borrowing further, when in fact they could only borrow further if they were to survive under his elevated rates of interest. He's never done the math. You can plug those higher rates of interest into the models I provided the Reagan administration and find, instead of collapsing at 2010, if we persisted under Volcker's extremely elevated prime rates, that is the rate of interest that the so-called Federal Reserve banks, which are of course 12 private corporations, that they were charging, the double-digit Federal Reserve prime rates that were charged under Volcker, would have precipitated in our failure early in Reagan's second term. And in fact, they practically did then, midway through his second term. We had one of the greatest stock market crashes in history. And what resolved it? The federal government, or the Federal Reserve, pouring more money into circulation by buying federal, by buying stocks, by buying federal debt, our debt, to the federal government, to the private Federal Reserve banks, and so we had an exacerbation of artificial indebtedness, purportedly to rescue us because we were in a terminal state, which was relieved by what? Reducing interest rates. As I've said, interest is the cause of the problems. What have they always done to relieve us from what's wrongly called a recession, which is a perpetual multiplication of artificial indebtedness, a perpetual multiplication of disadvantage? They've always had to reduce interest rates, the very crime against us, you see. So he goes on, restoring soundness to the dollar will remove the government's ability and incentive to inflate the currency. You don't inflate the currency, you inflate the circulation, if you're inflating the circulation, which is what Ron Paul is claiming is happening. And the math is he's flunking a second grade math problem. An increase in the volume of circulation does not result simply from putting more money into circulation on the one hand, where on the other hand you're paying more money out of circulation in the way of servicing the principal and interest of this escalated sum of artificial indebtedness. You see, unless you account for both, you don't know what the sum of circulation was. And if we actually had an inflation of the volume of circulation, we would be awash in money, and the fact that we all had money would be somehow leading to our destruction, which somehow Mr. Paul has never defined. So this is just more preposterous stuff. Now, how could these two men both be claiming to end the Federal Reserve System when in fact both are advocates of interest? What's the difference? When both think that new money is lent into circulation, what's the difference? There is no difference. And those two grievous errors are the errors that allow us to tolerate the present obfuscation of our currency, which obfuscation is terminal. Therefore, how do Mr. Paul or Mr. Kucinich possibly represent the people? Before I conclude, I want to say a couple of quick things about Mr. Paul's infatuation with the gold standard. The reason that the gold standard would inevitably fail itself is that it's impossible to sustain all the industry that we're capable of if we limit the circulation to some equivalent of a finite resource such as gold, silver, platinum, whatever, air, water, you name it. If it's finite, the circulation is restricted to that. The only reason you need something backing a currency is because you haven't refined a currency, because you haven't rectified a currency of all faults. To rectify it of all faults is to maintain, indeed, the object which Mr. Paul purports to seek, and that is a perpetual one-to-one relationship between circulation and remaining value of represented property. The only way to achieve that is under mathematically perfected economy, because you have unlimited capacity to monetize, and you're paying the circulation out of circulation at the rate of consumption or depreciation, which, without any regulation whatsoever, solves the issue of maintaining a circulation which is neither inflationary nor deflationary, nor multiplies artificial indebtedness in proportion to capacity to pay, thus rendering terminal failure. Thanks again for listening. It's an honor to speak on the most vital matters of our time.